My name is Martin Henriksen. I'm a field specialist on the tractors over 100 horsepower, and I'm going to be talking to you today about the differences between the STX 450 and the John Deere 9520, both 450 horsepower tractors. What I want to start with is, of course, talking about the drivetrain. John Deere does offer an 18-speed transmission, a full power shift. The STX has a 16-speed power shift. Because of some of the differences in the overall framework and the differential components, the transmission components, the framework, the engine itself, there's reason for John Deere to do some derating. And although we derate as well, John Deere derates at a sooner or a quicker level. In this chart here, you can see where we are at 8th gear. They do not do any derating. As they start gearing down and they're in 7th gear, they derate the 9520 and the 9620. And in these yellow numbers here, you see where they are derating all the way down through, and these are the horsepower levels that they derate to. To drive that point home a little further, we have what we're doing here is comparing again the 9520 to the 450 and looking at the axle options that are in there. The option for a 450 is a heavy-duty axle with a double reduction. You can see it here, and if you look down here, on the STX we will derate at 3.2 miles an hour. On the standard axle, which is a single planetary reduction with 4 pinions in it, we start to derate at a rate of 3.9 mile an hour. We look at this green line here. This is John Deere 9520. They derate from 5.4 mile an hour back. Okay, now we'll move into the serviceability area on the two tractors now. You'll see here where John Deere has a service interval of 250 hours, whereas the STX 450 has a service interval of 500 hours, and that is, of course, provided the proper filters and the proper oils are being used. So therefore, in a 500-hour operating cycle, there's a savings of 1 oil change and 1 filter change. I want to point out a couple of other things as far as serviceability is concerned. You've got 270-gallon fuel tank on the John Deere versus 300 on the STX. Therefore, you're not going to be spending as much time fueling. You'll also notice here they only allow for about 256 usable gallons on the Deere, whereas on the STX we can probably use up to about 295 gallons. It's going to keep us in the field for a longer period of time. The hydraulic reservoir on the John Deere is mounted right up in front of the cab on the tractor. You must carry oil up the steps and around in front of the cab in order to top up the hydraulic oil, whereas on the STX it's conveniently located at the bottom of the steps up into the cab with a sight glass and a filler tube right at ground level. They have about half a dozen grease zerks on the John Deere that require daily maintenance. We have around 7 or 8, I guess, on the 450 that require 50-hour maintenance. So saves you time in that regard as well. Now let's look at the hitch and hydraulic section. When we look at the John Deere tractor, they have 1 standard pump. On the standard transmission models, that pump produces 44 gallons, whereas on the power shift model, that pump runs a little bit faster, so it produces 48 gallons. And that's all they have. As you know, on the STX series, we have a basic 40-gallon per minute pump, and we have the optional 55-gallon pump. They do not have that capability. To meet the higher demands in the John Deere world, they added a 30-gallon separate pump to give them a combined flow on the power shift transmission of 78 total gallons. This was introduced on the John Deere about a year ago. To meet that demand, we're introducing the new twin flow system at this meeting, and now we have the capability of producing a total of 90 gallons per minute total flow on an STX tractor. And what that extra pump is a 35-gallon pump. It's a separate pump driven by a separate system. It can only be put on the power shift transmission without PTO. You have a separate filtration system, you have a separate set of controls in the cab, and you have separate control valves at the back of the tractor with 3/4 inch couplers. The hitch capacity, let's look at that. The hitch capacity on the 450 is around 19,000 pounds, whereas it's only around 14,500 on the John Deere. That tells us one important thing, and that is the strength of our frame, overall frame, and our articulation point is such that it'll handle that extra draft loading and lift requirement better than what the Deere will do. Okay, now let's turn our attention to the operator comfort that we have. What we have on the STX tractor is around 23% more cab space. It's a more spacious cab, there's more usable windshield area, there's more usable glass area out the right-hand side. And oh, by the way, that right-hand door opens so that you can install monitors, do some servicing, clean out the cab. That you do not find on the John Deere. What you have to do here in this, when you have the two tractors sitting together, is to take an opportunity to get in that cab, feel the extra spaciousness, look at some of the other comforts that are involved in the cab, and then compare that on the STX. You'll find also when you get into the STX, you got much superior, better view over the hood than you do on the John Deere. In fact, some of the fellows that have been out here already with tape measures have told me that it's about an 18-foot improvement over the Deere. In other words, you can see closer, about 18 feet closer in front of the tractor on the STX than you can on the Deere. Okay, now let's turn our attention to the power units that are in these two tractors. On the John Deere, they either have an 8.1 liter in their smaller unit or a 12.5 liter in all other units, including the 500 horsepower class tractor. On the STX series, on our small frame tractor, we have a 8.3 liter or a 9 liter option. And then as we move into the 375, 4 1/4, 450, 500, we have the 15 liter Cummins QSX series engine. A very reliable engine, up to 13% more power bulge and up to 50% torque rise. Let's just talk about axles for a few minutes. On the small frame tractor, we have a single reduction 3 planetary system. As we move on up, standard equipment in the 375, 4 1/4, and 450 is the standard 4 planetary single reduction axle. Here we're standing in front of the heavy duty double reduction axle, which is standard in all the scraper versions and is also a standard in the STX 500. This has become optional in your 375, 4 1/4, and 450. Of course, in the past, it had been an option on the 375. And you can see here where there's a double reduction and 3 sets of those heavy-duty planets. And incidentally, this whole complete axle would weigh more than 750 pounds more than the standard axle. Okay, now we're going to start having a good look at the two frames here. We're going to go down into a pit under both tractors and have a good look at from the bottom up. But first of all, let's have a look at this rear axle. The whole rear assembly here is much more massive. We've got 1/2-inch material in the large frame tractors. There's a good wide framework, and this framework there's continuity on this framework from front to back throughout this tractor. This tractor is equipped with a standard axle. Of course, on the 450, the heavy-duty axle has become an option. This framework that we already talked about a little bit, it's a good wide framework. As it moves forward here, they cut out this framework and they merely sit the mounting pads down on top of the axles. There's no need for flaring out to accommodate the axle. There's not a lot of extra gusseting to accomplish that. We do have the heavy-duty drawbar on this tractor. It has the extra supporting mechanism underneath. It is non-swingable. This drawbar also gives you the opportunity to hook in your optional tow cable at the front end. So this hitch is primarily needed when you're going to experience high vertical loads, like in the case of a heavy-duty slurry manure wagon, maybe a heavy-duty grain cart, anything that's going to produce a lot of extra downward pressure. Of course, this tractor is equipped with 5 control valves at the back end here already. If we were to have the twin flow system right up in this area, in between them, there would be 2 more sets of valves, and they would be 3/4 inch couplers. Okay, we talked about this, the hitch, the heavy-duty hitch. Here's the provision right in this area for the optional tow cable that would go out and just store at the front of the tractor. And you'll notice here that this drawbar hooks right close to the center of the tractor, not very far away from the main articulation joint. Your big uniball is right up above this, and of course above that is your big tie strap between the frame and the rear of the tractor. It's a tri-point articulation, if you will. Because of where this drawbar attaches to in the middle of the tractor, and because of the geometry that we have in that tri-point articulation, a lot of the horizontal draft forces that we encounter are transferred down into the center of the tractor. So therefore, there's probably a little bit of that weight being transferred to the front axle. We'll see later where John Deere actually hooks a little further back and talk about that when we get there. Okay, as we move back through the tractor here, you'll see that the frame is still that good wide frame all the way through, some extra reinforcing in here. And you can see the transmission. This is a 16-speed power shift transmission. It's a good deep transmission, a heavily built Fuji transmission. And there is the possibility of lowering that transmission out of the framework into a pit if the dealer has that provision. Otherwise, it does have to go out the top side. While we're looking at this area of the tractor now, you'll see that it's still a good wide framework up in here. We've got a couple of hydraulic filters here. They're vertically mounted hydraulic filters. With this wide frame member that we have at the front end, we're able to accommodate that 15-liter engine. It can be sat down in the frame. Your radiator and your coolers can be sat down in the frame. In fact, we run the fan off of an area directly off the front of the crankshaft. And as a result, we're able to give you the best in-class over-the-hood visibility. It keeps that whole hood design down. Now, as you look here, you also see when you get into these bigger tractors, we do have to sometimes put suitcase weights on the front. We have a good cast support member here that can be picked up with pallet forks and mounted on the tractor. And then, of course, your suitcase weights fit out to the side. While we're talking about the width of the framework on the STX staggered tractor, you can see as you look at the nose of this tractor, it's a nice wide configuration. In fact, these components around the headlights and in here are all cast iron, so if you happen to hit something, you're not going to damage anything. Another provision we have here at the front end is a quick clean out for a radiator clean out. If you happen to need to clean it out, this door will open. And then, of course, if there's garbage in there that has to be expelled, there's a lever right here that you open, and it opens this door down here for ready access and easy clean out. Because of the low profile of this tractor and the fact that we have the wide frame to fit all these components into, you can see up into the operator area very easily. You can see the steering wheel over the hood, and this relates into much better over the hood visibility. We'll look at the front of the John Deere now from the same distance from in front of the tractor. As you look up towards that operator, all you can see basically is the top of the cab. You cannot see the steering wheel or the operator for that matter. Now let's have a look at what John Deere has to offer, and we'll start by looking at the back end here like we did previously on the STX. You can see down in this area the frame is very narrow. They do flare it out here so that there's a little wider fender well, but at the same token they still have to flare out from the frame to accommodate the axles. Typically there would be, on this tractor, there would be over a 2,000-pound weight bracket fastened up in this area onto the left fender. So there would be quite a bit of mass in here to get this tractor typically weighted properly. You can see here there are 4 remote control valves. If they put their extra flow kit on here, then they stack another couple of valves and there's a blank off between those valves. We'll also note they do not have heavy-duty drawbar options. This is a solid, about a 3x3 drawbar. Does not appear to be as strong as what we are offering on the STX series. In addition, you can see the axle throughout here. Physically, it's probably pretty close to what the size of our standard axle, but it does not have the same capabilities internally as our axles do. Let's have a look at this drawbar. It hooks here at the front end, closer to the rear of the tractor. In fact, it's close to the front of the rims on the wheels. And since it is so far back, it has a tendency perhaps to throw more of the draft load onto the rear tires rather than like the STX does when the pivot point is clear up in this area. The articulation and oscillation occur in this area on the John Deere tractor. Here is the bottom pivot point right in here, and then of course there's a second one straight up below the back of the cab. The oscillation portion of this occurs right at this joint here. This part here oscillates in relation to this portion. Because this is such a short wheelbase tractor, in fact it's 16 inches shorter than the 450, with these 800 tires that we've got on here, they've had to add steering stops. Because of our long wheelbase, we do not have to have the requirement of steering stops for just about all sizes of tires. Let's have a look at the center part of this tractor now. As it moves beyond the articulation point here, now you can see the frame starts to widen out. In fact, as you follow the frame further back here, it goes into sort of almost an automotive type of framework. It does have to be widened out here because now your 18-speed power shift, or any of the transmissions for that matter, are mounted up directly above me here. You'll notice too that there's too many components down here for the transmission to be dropped out the bottom, so therefore it must be taken out the top after the cab and the hydraulic reservoir have been removed. Also, as well, we're down in here, you'll see this black component here. You do have a 2-stage or 2-part fuel tank, one on either side of this front frame, and this is the crossover tube between those 2 fuel tanks. Right here, the frame had been widened out for the transmission. Now as we move back, that framework narrows up again, and because of the narrower framework here, they have to take some extra supporting mechanisms and put them under the axles here. And a little later, we'll see how that ties in with what's on top of the axle. While we're in this area, have a look at this horizontally mounted hydraulic filter. This filter is not the most convenient to change because it's mounted up underneath next to the engine. On the STX, we showed you how convenient it was to open the clean out under the radiator. On the John Deere, you can see this black plate up here with 6 bolts in it. That is the clean out area under the radiator. Now that we're close to the front of the tractor, again, we're looking at the frame, and this whole front frame is narrower. You see these motor mounts up here. We have a 12.5 liter engine, which is a narrower design engine than the 15-liter engine in the STX. And even though it is narrower, because of the narrow frame design, it still mounts on top of the frame, as does the radiator and the coolers in the front that result in pour over the hood visibility. With the narrow frame design that they have here, you can see how they've had to flare out the mountings here with gussets to accommodate the axles, to bolt into the axles. And then of course there's this extra piece down here that we saw earlier that goes underneath to help support the axle, and that's primarily because the mounting is on the outside of the main frame. While we're up in this area, you see these series of big bolts here, and then there's these brackets in this area. They flow all the way forward to the front end of the tractor over here, and that's where your front weight carrier is located. So instead of having the weights on the side of the tractor, they're right out in front of the nose, and therefore as the grill opens, it actually contacts the weights, and the grill cannot be opened all the way. In addition to that, this portion in here is a plastic nose. It's not a solid cast nose like we have on the STX. Okay, now let's turn our attention to the overall weight of these tractors. You've had an opportunity to look at the frames of both tractors from the bottom up for a change, and I think you can already agree that there is a significant difference in the structure that you saw there. And in fact, it bears out right here when we start to go to the weighting and the ballasting. The shipping weight on the 9520 John Deere, of course, is 33,770 pounds. The shipping weight on the 450 is 38,830. So there's a significant difference right there. If we're going to weight these tractors to say 100 pounds per horsepower, and that's a pretty typical weighting and ballasting number, therefore we'd have to weight them to 45,000 pounds. They're both 450 horse tractors, so they both have to weigh 45,000 pounds. To get there on the John Deere, they have to add 11,230 pounds. On the STX, we only have to add 6,170 pounds. The difference between those two numbers is evident in this pile of weight we've got there, about 5,060 pounds worth. You have to add to that John Deere tractor in the form of wheel weights, suitcase weights, whatever the case may be, to get it up to the 45,000 pounds. And of course, because they're adding all this extra weight, that can equate to about $4,100 additional cost. This pretty well concludes our walk around here, but we'd like to emphasize a couple of points. You saw as you walked under these two tractors that there's certainly more durability built into the STX tractor, and we saw by the pile of weights on the other side as to how much more weight we had to put into this tractor to get it up to that operating level at an additional cost. We've got an excellent environment for the operator, a nice roomy cab, excellent over the hood visibility. We've got extra hydraulics that you may need. You've got good sound axles where you don't have to worry about derating like you see done on the John Deere. So keeping some of those things in mind, we hope that you can go out and sell more STX tractors, and good selling.